The door that shouldn't exist. No one noticed the door at first. That wasn't unusual at Harrington and Lowe Accounting. The firm specialized in things people preferred not to notice. Numbers that bled quietly, losses hidden behind clean spreadsheets, grief converted into decimals and footnotes. The offices were orderly, predictable, beige walls, gray carpet, fluorescent lights that hummed like tired insects. So when the door appeared at the end of the west corridor, it slipped into the building like a held breath. It was wrong in subtle ways. The frame was old, older than the building itself, dark oak, scratched with shallow grooves that looked almost deliberate. No plaque, no number. The brass handle was worn smooth, as though countless hands had turned it over decades. Yet no one could remember seeing it before that morning. They assumed it led to storage. They were wrong. Charles Stanton. Charles noticed the door at 9:17 a.m. He had been counting ceiling tiles, an old habit from overseas, something to keep his mind anchored, when he reached the end of the hallway and saw it standing there, patient, waiting. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. That doesn't belong here. Charles had learned to trust that instinct. The military had taught him how to compartmentalize. Fear in one box, guilt in another. Grief locked away behind reinforced walls. He'd survived deployment, survived coming home. What he hadn't survived, what had followed him like a shadow, was the phone call. Auto accident, instant. Nothing could be done. His wife, Eleanor, had died on a rain-slicked interstate while he was halfway across the world, counting down days and promising himself she'd be there when he returned. He hadn't cried at the funeral, or afterward. He'd folded the grief into himself like a flag and stored it where it couldn't interfere with living. But standing in front of the door, his hands trembled. Without knowing why, Charles reached for the handle. The door opened silently. Inside was not a room. It was a stretch of road, wet with rain, illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. His heart stopped. The smell hit him first. Oil, rain, burnt rubber. The sound followed. Distant sirens, murmured voices, the static crackle of a police radio. And then he saw her. Eleanor stood beside the wreckage, unharmed, exactly as she'd looked the last time he'd seen her. She smiled, soft and sad. "You came," she said. "I wasn't there," Charles whispered. The words tore out of him. "I should have been there." She stepped closer. "You were exactly where you needed to be." They talked, not about the accident, not about blame, but about the years they had shared, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet nights that mattered more than either of them had realized at the time. When she took his hand, it was warm. "Living doesn't dishonor me," Eleanor said gently. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting." When Charles stepped back into the hallway, the door closed behind him. His eyes were wet. For the first time in 8 years, his chest felt light. Cynthia Morales. Cynthia lost her son on a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt cruel in its normalcy. She hadn't been able to step into the hallway since the door appeared. Something in her knew with terrifying certainty, that it was meant for her, and she hated that. Her son, Daniel, had been 16, bright, reckless, taken by a drunk driver on his way home from a friend's house. Cynthia had lived in the space between if only and what if ever since. If only I'd called him. What if I'd said no? When she finally opened the door, she found herself in her kitchen. Sunlight spilled across the table. Daniel sat there, hunched over his phone, exactly as he used to, tapping out messages with a half smile. "You didn't fail me," he said, before she could speak. She broke then, sobbed the way she never had, raw, unfiltered, collapsing under the weight of everything she'd carried alone. Daniel stood and hugged her. "I needed you to let me go," he whispered. When Cynthia returned to the office, she walked straighter,